Okay, we're recording now. Welcome to AK Rex channel, welcome to my server, and welcome our special guest, Jeffrey Bond. Jeffrey, would you like to remind everybody again who you are, because it's been a while? So let's hear it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I am the education director at Ogden's Eccles Dinosaur Park in Ogden, Utah. I've been in paleontology since 1992, dinosaur paleontology, and I guess that's me. Paleontologically speaking.
Well, at least people can connect the dots now. Basically, if you guys remember, me and Josh, and Jeffrey, we've done a video a while ago when we did it was like 2.5 hours, I think, recording or something like that. It was quite long, and we were just discussing all sorts of different things. You were also giving us a bit of a insight into the exhibits that you guys had in the museum and all of the other stuff, basically giving us all the things that are dinosaur related and things that are mainly the primary focus on this channel. So anyway, shall we jump into some points maybe to tackle, because I think we really wanna we've been wanting to do this for a while, and I just think, why not?
Hey, yeah. Good.
So, remember, I wanted to start with this one actually. You know how we had a brief discussion in private about things like what is the difference between when you talk about the evidence versus proof. You know, those different concepts, which I used to, admittedly, to my own fault. There was a point when I actually made a claim somewhere, some time ago, which I cannot remember where, so I can, properly, hold myself to account, so to speak. But yeah, I was saying that evidence can be proved. Evidence can be used as proof as well. But what I meant, really, I think, based on the conversation that we had, me and you, Jeffrey, was that it can be strong enough to support a theory or something of that sort. So would you like to elaborate on the concepts and why is it important to actually understand the difference? What it means, what does proof mean, and what does basically evidence mean?
Yeah, okay. So, well, I remember in your latest video where you're talking with Josh about the skin charts, brought up how I'm always talking about, like, how do we know, right?
Yep.
And that is really what gets to the crux of the answer there. Proof and evidence are things that do similar, a similar job depending on what discipline you're using.
Sorry, hang on a second. Sorry, some of your words are cutting off. Can you just double check your mic to make sure that you're holding it properly? So, because I noticed that sometimes letters are cutting off, and just want to make sure that everybody can hear. Just do another test quickly. So you said it was a what was the last one? Just repeat the last sentence if you can, if you don't mind, just to make sure.
So now I've got to get my train of thought back. So, evidence and proof are easily confused because we form similar roles, different disciplines, but they are actually two different things. They're doing the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And also your connection is much better now.
Okay.
So, yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, proof generally, how when we sometimes if you go into like mathematical concepts, you know how in geometry, for example, you have to prove like a theory or something like that. You know, they like when it comes to like a Pythagoras, you know, theory and stuff like that. So they always say prove it. You know, they don't actually say provide evidence, but they say prove it. So it's is it fair to say that it's a mathematical concept when you talk about proof itself? Proof as such is a mathematical concept, right?
Yes, and that's because it's dealing with abstract things. With science, you can't use a proof because in science, you're attempting to describe the world as it is, right? And so that means that the physical universe around you is the ultimate authority. Such, it is impossible for us understand every aspect of it one time. Nobody can know the entire universe, right? Well, philosophically speaking, you can have evidence that's in support of that. Scientific evidence is even more a subset of the concept of evidence. We can't even accept as scientists any kind of evidence out there. Textual evidence, for example, doesn't mean anything to a scientist. If you want to support a scientific idea, you need to find physical, measurable, independently verifiable evidence. That's what's going to support or refute an idea. Mathematics, or also in philosophy, where you're talking about abstract, a proof using premises that then test the internal consistency of an idea. Okay? Like if you've ever been through high school geometry, these proofs demonstrate something that you didn't know before.
Oh yeah, I've done lots of that.
What you're actually doing is showing that an idea is consistent. And you're showing how you know what you know. Okay? So you can see where those two different things, they're similar. In science, you're showing how you know what you know. It's physical evidence, physical, measurable, and independently verifiable evidence. But it's not enough to just show that the idea is internally consistent. That idea has to match the physical world. In mathematics and philosophy, all you have to do is show that the idea is ordered, internally consistent. And to give you an example from the philosophical end, I'm aware of a philosophical proof that God exists. Does that mean that you can force people to believe in God? No. All that philosophical proof does say that God can be internally consistent concept. And that's as far as you can take it.
Yeah, which means basically that when it comes to evidence, when it comes to science in particular, in a way this actually, is it fair to assume that, well, assess actually, not assume, wrong word, that it's more demanding, so to speak. So you have a more demands and requirements and conditions that need to be met in order to support a theory from a scientific, so to say, standpoint, just for the purposes of obviously connecting the dots here.
Yeah, it's like you've got an extra sort of a step. A physicist, or let's say an astrophysicist, you can use mathematics to model the behavior of a black hole all you want until you test that against observations in the physical world. Doesn't mean a whole lot. But if your model predicts a new discovery and it passes the test, it got a sound idea, and you continue that process, and eventually that hypothesis, internally consistent idea, it worked out in abstract. If it accords with the physical world, then it's a theory. Okay? That's kind of how it works with stuff like relativity or evolution or things like that. Those are theories that have passed a whole heck of a lot of tests. They all started out with that abstract sort of a, I don't know that you could necessarily call it a proof, but certainly a hypothesis, and both a proof and a hypothesis kind of come intellectually from the same place.
So most of the times when we okay, here's the thing. When we use the rhetoric in the form of wanting, well, naturally, when we in paleontology, I noticed that a lot of times a lot of hypotheses get produced, sometimes out of thin air. Well, not sometimes, that would be an understatement. So we say we disprove hypotheses. So how does that connect to what we have just established?
That's where kind of get into colloquialisms. And I want to make it clear before explaining what I'm saying, that, you know, colloquialism is not wrong. It's just a little less precise conceptually speaking. And so scientists will use it, especially when talking with general public. But when we're working within the discipline, it's a good idea in the habit of using the precise language. Okay, so when we say that we're proving or disproving a hypothesis, what we're actually doing is testing it. And kind of see, like, the verb prove does mean to test, as well as these other concepts like demonstrating the truth of. So it's not incorrect, colloquially speaking, but it is imprecise. It's kind of where the confusion is from.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, I just thought it would be important to establish that as well. But well, now that we understand more or less where we are on this, I hope everybody who is gonna be watching the video when it's published on the channel will be on board with this as well. Maybe we can start looking into some things that we're seeing, in paleontology as of late. I don't know. I have a few pet peeves here and there, Jeffrey. I think you have some too. In fact,
Yep.
Some of them are actually quite common. So, you know what? You're a guest. You get to go first. Go ahead.
Oh, and pet peeves. The ones that's kind of been on my mind lately, part because of the way the dinosaur park is set up, it has to do with Paleoart. Don't get me wrong, I'm a paleo artist myself. I don't do a lot of reconstructions, but I'll dabble. But a big part of my job goes into assessing things as reconstructions, and because I've got to be able to communicate to the general public just how realistic a given statue in the park is. Now, in part because of the physical nature of exhibits, we can't afford to go through the entire park. We've got like 65 different kinds of historic animal represented outside alone. That doesn't even count the indoor exhibits. And it's just not feasible to go through and change everything every time somebody has a new idea about that particular taxon. And it's not desirable. Science has a history as well, and we don't understand history of science, then we're doomed to repeat mistakes have been made. This is a totally different topic, but I could go at length at some of the mistakes that we're repeating now were made 100 years ago. It's eerie how many of them are showing up. So, back to Paleoart, do a lot of assessment on these to determine what their use is, how we can communicate the science to the public through this particular piece of art. I've been seeing a lot of paleo artists in different forums, DeviantArt, Facebook, Instagram.
Oh God, the dreaded DeviantArt, yes. I mean, it's probably getting hiccups every time we bring it up in our private conversations.
Oh yeah, it's a breeding ground for so much. Anyway, one of the things that concerns me, because it's going to affect how people view the science, is tendency of artists to conflate artistic ways of thinking, scientific ways of thinking. Hear a lot of people say, well, possible that this structure existed on Taxon A, then that's good enough for them. In art, yeah, illustrating possibilities, that's great. Illustrating possibilities is very much science fiction. And you'll see a lot of people say, well, all paleo art is science fiction anyway, so we should be able to do whatever we want, call that a reconstruction. That's a big problem. There is a huge difference between illustrating speculation and forwarding a reconstruction. Reconstruction is far more rigorous. Give you an example. We have two sculptures that are going to be coming into the park sometime this year. One of them I would consider a reconstruction. One of them would not be. A Tanystropheus that we're putting into the park, I would not consider rigorous enough to be a reconstruction. Doesn't mean that we just slap the thing together willy-nilly. We did a lot of research this particular taxon to figure out just how to represent it. This is a taxon that's got some great fossil evidence behind it. We've got Tanystropheus from different ages, from different areas of the world. We have skin impressions. We know a lot about this animal, and there's been some good study on it. But it doesn't mean that every point that we went through to create the art was tested against fossil record. For example, because of engineering with that incredibly long neck, like it more around 12 feet, some of the largest specimens. Yeah. This thing's got a fishing pole for a neck.
They are also, I noticed a lot of times, although they are quite, as you said correctly, they are numerous, and I presume also that means that they have multiple species all around the world too, both from the same and maybe variety of time periods, and they are not very frequently, represented. I don't see a whole lot of new, fresh art, reconstruct, or not just art, but just generally even a good reconstruction. Something that would be fresh, hasn't come across it yet, of a Tanystropheus. I just thought I'd point that out as well, because I haven't seen that many of them.
Yeah, which is kind of sad, because it is so bizarre looking. I'll have to put pictures of this up on the Discord once we get some. We're going to be bringing it into the park fairly soon.
If you have them right now, for example, if you have them literally right now while you talk, you can drop them on the live sessions and questions if you want the answers, whatever. Just basically the live chat that should be in front of you as well and me, so that we can keep an eye if people are going to be asking any questions. So you can drop it here if you want. Just saying.
Unfortunately, I don't have them.
Oh,
So,
bugger.
we haven't received the sculpture yet, so at best I've got in-process stuff that doesn't look like much, and it's not on this computer, so I can't
Right.
can't put it up yet. But, anyway,
But it will be available to you at some point anyway to upload pictures, right?
yeah, and I'll share those when I have them.
All right, great. Tanistrophius needs more love.
Oh, and it's been a fun taxon to research, let me tell you. But, it got this incredibly long neck, and so it's had some really challenging engineering behind it. As a result, smallest that we could make it was 23 feet. The maximum estimates for the largest specimen we get to about like 15 to 20. But we're talking about like 45 meters.
45-meter long Tanistrophius.
4 to 5, sorry.
How many?
4 to 5 meters.
4 to 5, not 45.
Right, 4 or 5.
Because that 45-meter long Tanistrophius, I was like, really?
That's my internet accent coming in.
I just I almost literally just fell off my chair, so careful with that.
Yeah.
I have to admit, though, it would have been quite awesome. So let's. Oh yes, Z-Boomer, you can make comments on the topics here in this chat where you just posted, and you can ask questions here. It's actually very encouraged, because while we're talking here, you guys can all type stuff and just either chat within yourselves, or you can ask questions and address us. But since there are not many people right now, you can just type them normally. But if there's gonna be, obviously, like later times, if more people jump in and it's gonna be like a feed going, then just tag either myself or Jeffrey at AKRex or at Sorocon if you want to make sure that we see it. But at the moment, I don't think it's necessary. I think we're fine like that. Okay, so sorry, Jeffrey. Tanistrophius.
No, so, because of the engineering, we had to inflate the animal's size just a little bit. And that's one reason why I wouldn't consider it a reconstruction, because we're altering something in the sculpture that we do not have support for in the fossil record. Now, does that mean that this animal is implausibly large, or this sculpture is implausibly large? No, there could be a Tanistrophius individual that got that big. It's not much bigger than what we've got fossils for, because that is an additional alteration at steps away from some of the rigor that I would expect from a reconstruction.
I was oh, sorry. Go ahead. You first.
I was just going to kind of wrap that up and just say, so that's kind of pet peeve that's been on my mind, is when you get people saying that there's only one genre of paleoart and it doesn't matter whether you speculate or not. Now, there are tons of genres within paleoart. Reconstruction is one of them, and it plays an important part. It's not the only valuable kind of paleoart. There are kinds of paleoart that you can speculate in. That's perfectly fine. But when it comes to a reconstruction, got to cut out the speculation as much as you possibly can. And if you cannot answer every little detail in your piece, something from the fossil record or from experiments, basically, you don't have scientific evidence backing that decision, and it's not reconstruction.
Yep, well said. And since we got into that, I really wanted to address further this point, because it's kind of been a pet peeve of mine when I notice, same thing as you said, people claim that this is plausible somehow because, they start going in reverse. It's like they're trying to basically smoke screen the whole conversation into this corner where, they try to get you to prove the negative. So I just said that they have, let's call them lips, although they're not really supposed to be lips. Everybody knows that, so we'll just use lips because it's shorter, and so everybody else probably understands what we mean by that. And yeah, this is really interesting that then they say, but you cannot disprove them. But you haven't proved them to begin with. I know I say this a lot, and I keep hammering this because many people still don't understand it. It's how the burden of proof works. That you cannot just, claim that something exists, do not provide evidence, and then when you questioned, you're just gonna be like, no, you cannot disprove it. But then how am I supposed to disprove it if you haven't even provided the supporting evidence to even support your reconstruction? So it's almost like it's dragging you into in the circles of this pointless loophole, and I find these conversations, to be honest, a bit insulting and to my intelligence. I don't mean to come off as a snob, although I don't really care, to be honest, but screw this, I'll be a snob, fine. But you know what, I just absolutely hate when the conversation is framed that way. It's almost like I have to go back to these very basic fundamental things that normally I would expect that the other side who is attempting to make a reconstruction would already be aware of, so we can simply talk like we are on the same page. And I don't feel like we are on the same page at the time, and while I don't really blame the person, on an individual personal level, it's just that I hate when these things get brought up. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right, and it being a rhetorician, as well as a scientist, it's one of the things that I find really frustrating about the whole phenomenon. It's not just that science gets clouded, but you also end up with a lot of presumption that one side is going to be inherently right by virtue of saying the right things rather than objective standard, like thing that is physical, tangible, measurable, and independently verifiable. That's one reason why we use scientific evidence when we do. Like I said, with Paleoart, there are other genres that it's perfectly fine to speculate. Reconstruction is just not one of them.
Yeah. No, it's again, makes sense. It's one of those things that makes perfect sense to me and to everybody I know and closely associate with. It's just sometimes it baffles me, why does it not make sense to... Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure it makes sense to others who like to oppose it. It's just that when they acknowledge that it makes sense, then they cannot just go back and, pretend like it doesn't exist anymore. And, well, we know what happens then. Either you get blocked, which happened to me quite a lot of times, all because I asked a simple question. All I asked was, remember I told you probably about this, and I brought it up in a conversation with Josh that we had last time, that all I did was I asked a simple question. What, in your opinion, I didn't just say general, I think I was, what, in your opinion makes a scientific reconstruction? Or what makes a reconstruction scientific? Or something of this sort. I had to even repeat it twice, actually, just to make sure that I was, the question was noted. And after I repeated it again, and, well, just basically, pointed out, hey, is there something wrong? Like, well, if you don't want to answer, it's fine, don't answer, but, I just don't get what's the problem, I was just trying to be cool about it, I mean, I wasn't trying to jab him or anything. And got blocked. Well, go figure. So, there is that, and, I mean, that's already, what they say, when they refuse the conversation, that's a response too. Especially when you know on what grounds it's been refused. That's also telling a lot, and sometimes a lack of response is also a response. So,
and some of the things that have come up in these conversations kind of give me an idea of why this is happening, and it seems like there's a bit of coming from the point of view of like art history, like, you know how there are like different movements, like Dadaism or Pointillism, or, you know, on and so forth.
Oh yeah.
It seems like in Paleoart, there's this growing ism. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but ism is now gonna be a word. You know, you can have ism, you can have an ist, a phobe. You know, there's all sorts of things that you can summarize into the family of words now.
But from some of the paleo artists that I've talked with who have advocated calling speculation a valid part of a reconstruction, a motive for them forwarding that idea isn't because they've thought through the consequences of that. It's because they think that the art is more compelling if there is a perception that that's how the animal could actually look. So even though they've produced something that doesn't look any different from anything that you would see in, say, Star Wars, right? It's just as much science fiction as anything that you've seen in Star Wars, which, by the way, some of the creatures in Star Wars are based on fossil animals. So that coming off the same basis, same method of construction, but them to call it a dinosaur, to give it a name, to talk about it using the language of scientists makes it more real to them, whether they've gone to the trouble of testing that against the real world or not. And what they care about is just that perception of realism, and it's coming at the expense of the ability to figure out what is real and what is not. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's one of those things that I really love about, you know, these things, you know, a very well written fantasy, because I actually don't consider Star Wars proper sci-fi. I actually think it's more on our fantasy side, but that's again my view on it. By the way, sorry about any background noise sometimes when I'm gonna be speaking. There may be things, because, you know, everybody is at home here, so part and parcel of that, just so you guys understand. If you hear something strange or loud noises, then it's just because there's people doing people's lives things, you know, and I am in my own room right now, locked away, so to speak, just so nobody gets interrupted. Anyways, yeah, everything you said makes perfect sense, and I hope everybody else is gonna be on board with that as well, and if not, they can always pop a question. So, shall we answer this point by Z-Boomer here in the chat? You see the chat in front of you?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so shall I read it, or do you want to read it? How should I go with that?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll do it, yeah. Right, so I agree with Jeffrey about the topic of Paleoart. See, there we go. I don't agree how many people call some interpretations as reconstructions, even though most of them are speculations. Right, so yeah, that makes sense. I disagree with a lot of these things as well. A lot of times when people call something a reconstruction, it's not really a reconstruction. They just say it's a reconstruction because, you know, they want to give it more credibility, but reconstructions, as far as I'm concerned, as Jeffrey pointed out correctly, there is a set of criteria and conditions that need to be met in order to make it a reconstruction. It's actually not a very difficult question to answer when you ask somebody what makes a reconstruction scientific, because it's one of those things that my feed just keeps going and going. Like, I need to, oh goodness, I need to, you know, do something about that later. But yeah, what do you think about this first sentence that you said? Do you think that's basically what we were addressing earlier on?
Well, it seems like we're on the same page here, and I like how Z Boomer puts this with a number of different
terms, like, there is a little bit of terminological inflation, I guess you could call it. If we get too many people calling reconstructions that aren't reconstructions, it does have an actual effect on people's ability to use the language clearly. Look at the term reconstruction. You are constructing something again. It's literally what that means. So if we're putting something there that we don't have any reason to say actually was there, if all we can say is that, well, it's possible it was there, it can't be a reconstruction. You're not restoring something that used to be there. And calling it that is kind of a rhetorical dirty trick to make you sound, make the art sound like it's more credible than it actually is. Please just call it a speculation and recognize that a speculation does have worth.
Yeah, it does have its place. Nobody's denying that it doesn't have a place. It's just that a lot of times when I get into these kind of conversations, though admittedly I don't do this as often as I used to for a variety of reasons, because mostly it just doesn't actually lead anywhere and ultimately serves no actual purpose unless I can see there is enough reason to, engage that there may be something promising about the discussion. And in which case I'm fine with that. But most of the times it's all about the fact that it's almost like, when you say that, when you point this out, it's almost like as if the opposition responds, as if we're trying to take the ground away from their feet, which is not really the case. We just want to call things what they are for the benefit of, for other people as well as ourselves, because you cannot really learn it if you're going to be calling, apples oranges and oranges apples, because then it becomes a bit of a mess. And I think part of the reason why, and one of the things I always personally thought the benefits of science in general it's to actually make things less messy. That's what I always thought anyway. So
that's a good way of putting it. It's kind of funny because it's such a messy process when you actually practice it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know what? When surgery is a messy process too, but eventually it leads to a result where you recover and you're not dead. For example, it's just like something like that. It's like it's a messy process to get a bullet out of your stomach, but once it's healed, then you're not gonna be a mess anymore because you're gonna live. So. There we go. So shall we move on to the next point? So one person that I always appreciate and use as an example is, I think it's pronounced, it says Zdenek, but I think it's Zdenek Burian. I'm not sure where this person is from. I'm pretty sure I heard the name. Does this sound familiar to you, Jeffrey? Zdenek Burian, this name of an artist?
Yeah, I think I struggle with Eastern languages, so it's European, I should say. That sounds about right to me.
Yeah, I would probably say it sounds, to me it sounds Eastern European, probably Polish, I would imagine. But it could be anything, really. But yeah, he basically worked for the rest of his life trying to make paleo arts of every single dinosaur, so people could know how those animals looked if they were alive. Now, I'm not saying that everything he made is accurate compared to whatever material we have now. Good point. Maybe. It's a good point it's a good thing to point that out, regardless, because a lot of people just don't get things. Sometimes it's a good thing that he did it, because there's going to be so many yahoos out there who are going to start like making claims, and because, sometimes the obvious needs to be restated. So thank you, Z-Boomer, for doing that as well. So the point is that he leads up to here is when you're a paleo artist, most of the times you need to reconstruct these animals based on the materials that we actually have. Kablamo.
And it's funny because you'll hear a lot of artists talk about that as, oh, don't you think that's so limiting? Well, yeah, it's limiting, but that's what we've been given. Like, for most dinosaurs, we don't know what they all look like. We've got taxa that are based on broken teeth.
Now we can make a guess as to how they would have looked. There's no point in calling that a reconstruction when you don't have enough material there. It's like a new Abelisaur that was named just last year based on a single neck bone. There's not a lot that you can say about that taxon. So get a reconstruction unless you're actually reconstructing the bone.
Do you know what else is funny? You reminded me of something very interesting that I have covered on my channel. When you said that there is a taxon that has been named based entirely on, teeth, basically, just dentition itself only. No, nothing else, just like tooth, right? Maybe a couple teeth. And I have actually cited material, a paper actually, from the Russian Udurchukan Formation, where I was just discussing the idea of what would we see in terms of the Russian Tyrannosaurids, because the time period is consistent with Mongolian, and Chinese Tyrannosaurids, etc. It's late Cretaceous, late Maastrichtian, I believe, and or Maastrichtian. I'm not sure actually how you pronounce it, but whatever. And yeah, it's quite interesting to note that this taxon, whatever that is, has not been named, but we do have plenty of other ones that get named just on the same material that we see. And I'm just kind of thinking whether or not do we just go down this rabbit hole and just name every single taxon based on tooth material only, or shall we just maybe kind of hold our horses there? So what do you think?
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of opinions when it comes to when you name a dinosaur, and really isn't an enforceable scientific standard. It's just how good is your case. You can name entire taxa off of teeth because of some of the weird things that teeth can do. It'd be a lot harder to do that off of a single vertebra. Vertebrae can give you a lot of information, and you can at least say this is an animal that is distinct from others in the area, and it doesn't accord with anything else that we have. There have been several taxa, and even in modern times, that have much more flimsy cases behind them, and they usually get overturned sooner or later. So that's kind of the self-correcting aspect of paleontology, science in general. And some people are perfectly fine to name something and let the chips fall where they may. Others are a lot more careful and don't want to give a name to anything until they can provide a rock-solid case. I tend towards the latter myself, but I haven't been in a position to name a new taxon yet. So,
yeah, obviously it's a tricky one, but I probably lean on the same way as you do, because I do not see what's the justification yet, because if you are missing all other pieces, how do you know that it may not be a different species of an already known taxon, which differs in dentition? And we have many examples of that, do we not? We have Torvosaurus, European species, and Portuguese actually, Torvosaurus gournei, and the American species Torvosaurus tanneri. And we probably have some other ones in Europe that may be even also synonymous with gournei or some others, but they differ in dentition. And we have many other cases like that out there as well, where species are established by their dentition, but not necessarily enough to separate them as taxa, but enough to, separate them as different species of the same taxa.
Yeah. And in the case of Torvosaurus, the teeth morphology is pretty much the same. It's like just relative size and number that they stuck in jaws, and that's about it. But there are other examples that are a lot more suspicious if we're talking about like teeth specifically. Pachycephalosaurs and Troodontids, for example, they have teeth in their jaws, not the whole dentition, mind you, but there are teeth in certain sections of the jaws
that look an awful lot like each other. This is a marginocephalian on one branch of the dinosaur family tree, the Ornithischian, and you've got a Saurischian, a theropod. They've got an entirely different diet, but they still have similar teeth in some cases. So if you're looking at troodontid teeth in an area that has pachycephalosaurs, recent discoveries have shown you got to be really careful about the taxonomy there.
The other funny part is that I'm pretty sure I've heard at some point somebody just used that as a as a way to suggest that Pachycephalosaurus may have been, just Pachycephalosaurids in general may have been omnivorous as such. So what are your thoughts on that, by the way, as well? And then after you finish that, we're going to read and address the next comment below.
Could you repeat the question? I actually got a little bit distracted by the comment that I started reading.
Oh, you were already reading. Okay, yeah, that's fine. No, I was saying that basically, what are your thoughts on this idea that everything okay? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You cut out for just a second there.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Everything good?
We're good.
Okay, lovely jubbly. It's a raw footage, guys, so no editing here, just raw and real, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, the question was, somebody at some point suggested, I've heard this actually, and I cannot remember who exactly did it, but they suggested that based on that comparison alone, that it may be, plausible that Pachycephalosaurids were omnivorous. So what are your thoughts about that? And after that, we can obviously address the comment.
I think that's a little premature. The Pachycephalosaurs are a really hard dinosaur to study because there's such a lack of good fossil material for them. So we end up with a lot of really odd hypotheses about them that can be pretty difficult to test. And I think that this is one of them. It's interesting because we've seen a lot of people try to challenge the idea that Ornithischians were hyperherbivorous. And because of some misconceptions with that, you'll get a lot of people kind of jumping on scientific musings about that and saying, oh, wow, Triceratops must have been omnivorous. And its jaws are not designed for efficient disposal or processing of carcass. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't have supplemented their diet with that. Modern herbivores do that. There isn't much way for us to really test how much of their diet would have been animal-based as opposed to plant-based.
It's also interesting that we find skulls mostly, isn't it? Or parts of the skulls. There's not a lot of the, stomach content, for example, that would be able to somehow give us more clues about that.
Right. So, when we're looking at the dentition of Pachycephalosaurs, I've seen people say, well, maybe they've got these really theropod-like teeth because their diet changed as they got older, a little bit like it does in Lemusaurus. It start out omnivorous and then they go hyperherbivorous. And that's plausible. I mean, we have a theropod that did that. Pachycephalosaurs are certainly weird. At the same time, do we have a strong basis for that claim? No, not really. I think that if we're going to test that, it would probably be best to bone isotope study on Pachycephalosaurs, especially ones of different ages, because that can give you an idea of what animals are taking in from their environment, how much of it have been plants and how much of it could have been more animal-based. So you have a few options. They, to my knowledge, they have not been studied yet, and so I'm not going to jump to any conclusions on anything especially an ornithischian, being something that is going to be eating a lot of.
I don't buy the idea that, say, Liaoningosaurus, the little ankylosaur that they said was a swimmer, liked to eat fish. I looked over that argument. I think it holds a lot of water.
Yeah, there's too much water in these arguments because we have to remember a lot of times it's just addiction to this sensationalism, just whoever gets to point it out and somehow accidentally comes across the, any kind of evidence to support it. They make a groundbreaking thing, but if it doesn't happen, they start a trend and they basically feel validated somehow because, go figure. Anyway, shall we address the comment? Or do you want to say something about that as well?
Another thing about that, I do get a little bit concerned when we'll say, "Oh, these look like theropod teeth," especially when they're comparing them with troodontid teeth, because troodonts have very unusual teeth for theropods. They've got much larger serrations. Those serrations almost hook-like in some species, and that's led to some hypotheses that they might have been omnivorous, which is a little bit more plausible because you see that happen with theropod lineages. They go from being predatory to be obviously herbivorous. So, seeing that a Pachycephalosaur should meat in its diet simply because its teeth look a little bit like an omnivorous theropod, we need a little bit better evidence before we go whole hog on that. But I'm not going to say it's not possible. It's just something that needs testing.
Yeah, same here. I would say it's not. I don't exclude the possibility, but again, possibility does not mean it's true yet. So we'll just have to wait and see. And it's also very interesting, that observation that with the, as you, in the ontogenetic process, you have the change or diversification of diet, and that's something we actually have a living example of, and we see that in tegus lizards. They do that. Many tegu keepers or breeders, they notice that quite a lot as well, that as they're, in fact, our common somebody we know very well, the paleo artist from Canada, not Mark, confuse him, Michael. There is a paleo artist named Mark, obviously, but that's not the same one I was referring to. Mike from Canada, the sculptor, basically, and he has a tegu, by the way, as a pet, and he also noticed that as she started growing up a little bit, she slowly started, diversifying the diet a little bit, so there was like other things getting introduced more. In fact, it was more leaning towards more omnivorous rather than exclusively, predatory type of diet, which is interesting. So there we go.
Well, that's kind of the funny thing too, is that like when we're classifying things, we like to categorize them as extreme as we possibly can, and animals especially are going to adapt to different circumstances in different ways, even at different times of life. I mean, we're living things are all dynamic systems, and change is the real watchword to look at there. So we can't describe them in terms of static, monolithic facts.
It's another interesting thing to note before we obviously jump into the comment, because Z-Boomer's probably been like falling asleep now while waiting for us to get to it, but we're getting to it. We just want to quickly add another thing here, that this is one of the problems for not understanding the full picture of the biology, of how they changed, because how when, like as an example that I listed as a tegu, we can actually test, what happens inside their system, what changes as they age, and how that basically dictates their diet in terms of what their supplementary requirements are, how they change, how they adapt based on the environment, based on the growth, the vitamins they require as well, which are obviously going to be outsourced from a variety of different diets. So we unfortunately do not have any way, for sure at least, to test that in dinosaurs. unless we find some specific stomach contents where we can maybe make some hypothesis. So there is that.
Okay, do you want me to read Z-Boomer's comment?
You go for it.
All right, I'll read the whole thing and then we'll hit the point. Z-Boomer says, there's something like this in Brazil, but it's actually pretty confusing, with confusing in quotation marks. Since here we have, for some reason, quote-unquote Carcharodontosaurus species and quote-unquote Spinosaurus aegypticus. Say it's confusing because those are genus from Africa. And correct me if I'm wrong, from what we know, South America and Africa were already separated in the Cretaceous period, right? So I already made some points about Carcharodontosaurus species, which I don't think it is a Carcharodontosaurus or a Carcharodontosaurinae. It is a Gigantosaurinii. Since we do have evidence of Giganotosaurus, and I mispronounced Giganotosauri. Anyway, so we do have evidences of Giganotosaurus and Mapusaurus living in South America. And Spinosaurus, I don't exactly have a point about it since we only have teeth. We already have some Spinosaurids, which we don't have too many information about them in Brazil, like Irritator, Gatorama, Oxalia, etc. So that's what Z-Boomer says.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Do you know what I noticed? One of the things I would probably want to clarify, few things here. Well, this is a mistake that I have made. And if you remember that I've been, there was somebody who tried to troll me on my channel from an old video, actually, where I was roasting, the National Geographic article, and Brian N. as a result as well, as a collateral damage there. So, I said something about, I think I said something, I don't even remember what it was, about the, the small lowercase letters, but it's actually with the species name, so the Aegypticus should be the small letter. It shouldn't be uppercase, it should be lowercase. So you have uppercase with the taxa, and you have the lowercase with the species names. So I'll point that out because although I have found out about that already at that point, internet trolls can be useful sometimes, actually. I just call them useful idiots, so to speak. But
Very Animal Farm of you.
Was that?
Very Animal Farm of you.
Yeah.
I don't think that was actually used in Animal Farm, but it's very much in the of it. Anyway, so
also, Jeffrey, maybe we should pay some more attention to the fact that it might be more important to point out at which point in the Cretaceous period, because Cretaceous period is a very abstract and large umbrella term, because it's got so many divisions there. So at which point did these two continents become separate? That's what's important to know, and then compare it to the time periods of when the said taxa of the Carcharodontosaurids and Spinosaurids were first and last listed in a fossil record. I think that's what would need to be done to test that.
I was just going to point that out. The Cretaceous period is 80 million years long. And, well, dinosaurs died out about 66 million years ago, right? So Cretaceous period just by itself is longer than the entire Cenozoic era. And so, when we talk about stuff that happened during the Cretaceous, it helps to really narrow some things down. These two animals, Carcharodontosaurus and Spinosaurus, lived in North Africa during the early Cretaceous. There are some fossils that have been discovered in Utah that are kind of shaking up the timeline as far as when the Atlantic Ocean first showed up. We have a dinosaur here at the park, actually. We've got the skeleton on display, Moabosaurus. Really funky thing about it is that it's a turriosaur. Up until the discovery of Moabosaurus and its cousin, Aerosaurus, which I'll get back to in a second, there were no turriosaurs known outside of Europe. They're living up in Utah here at the same time, roughly, that Tyrannosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus were living. Yet there are a relic population from something that came from Europe had to have crossed the Atlantic a lot later than we thought. We've got mammal bones that are corresponding between Utah and Europe in the same way. So we're starting to get multiple levels reinforcing the Atlantic Ocean came a lot later than we actually thought it did. So Carcharodontosaurus and Spinosaurus are North African taxa. It's likely that South America and Africa were still connected at that time, and they could have passed into South America that early. It'd be a little confusing because we're not entirely sure on the timing of that, and we're finding some fossils that are causing us to question some of the old hypotheses that we had about it. As far as this mystery Carcharodontosaur, the Carcharodontosaurus species, a lot of taxonomy depends on who you talk to and what their reasoning is. That's why I said I'd come back to Mierosaurus. We have a couple of different institutions in Utah that looked at the same skeletons, Moabosaurus and Mierosaurus, both the holotypes there, and came to very different conclusions about their relationship. The Utah Geological Survey considers them separate taxa, related but separate. Brigham Young University considers Mierosaurus a junior synonym of Moabosaurus. I just saw the comment there, Sarkhan. Would you type them here, please? Them being...
I didn't want to interrupt you speaking, so I just decided to tag you in the comment. Yeah, the two taxa that you just basically cited, just type what they're spelled like, so that in case...
Sure. Yeah.
So we can always go back and look them up and anything. Just because, dinosaur names are sometimes ridiculous.
Oh, there's Moabosaurus utahensis.
Moabosaurus utahensis, yeah.
I can't remember Mierosaurus, his name. That's how you spell that.
Maybe, yeah. Okay, well, we can at least use that for now. So, sorry, I carry on. I didn't want to interrupt. That's why I decided to.
It's a brand new taxa, so it's a good thing to kind of point out. So, same sort of things kind of happening with Carcharodontosaurus and Giganotosaurus. There are some taxonomists or systematists who consider Giganotosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus the same genus. Greg Paul would be the most prominent one that I can think of, and that's, as far as I know, that's a pretty minority opinion, and unfortunately don't have Paul's rationale for why he's saying that, other than he's a lumper. He likes to lump taxa together.
Yeah, I've seen that quite a lot, and especially in his... I was in London's Museum of Natural History, and I just decided to look at the book that one of these, the Princeton Field Guide to Dinosaurs or something like that.
Yeah.
And I looked at it, and yeah. My brain started frying basically when I was looking at the stuff. Well, I'll be honest, I don't want to shit on him because it's nothing personal. Like, as I say, nothing personal, only business here. But I just couldn't. It was just so much cringe there about how much of a mess it was, and then when somebody picks it up and reads it and it's gonna be like all over the community forums and everything, and then try basically explaining to that person then that most of the stuff that was being pointed out there is just so much it's just a mess basically, and a lot of it would have been justified if only it had support, but there's actually no support for it either. And then he also jumped on this whole bandwagon with, the extra oral tissue, lippy thingamajiggy, whatever, and yeah. Oh my goodness, right.
And Paul is very much known for that. He's a major reason why the Velociraptors of Jurassic Park
have the name Velociraptor, not Deinonychus. And why the novel refers to the taxon as Velociraptor anteropus. That's something that has been very much studied and refuted. Nobody considers Velociraptor anteropus a valid taxon. Well, he's known as being a bit of a maverick that way. My concern is less who, because he's one of the ones who proposed Giraffatitan. And having looked at the evidence myself, I can support that. That Giraffatitan does look like it would be a valid genus and separate from Brachiosaurus. There's a good argument for that. So I'll go along with it. I don't really care who is saying it. But you mentioned the Princeton Field Guide to Dinosaurs specifically. I've looked through that. I've looked for justifications for some of the decisions that he's made in his skeletals, and I've away from it with a lot of head scratching. The Carnotaurus, in at least one of the editions of that book, for example, it's got bones in there that are not part of the holotype. He's left some bones out, so it makes me wonder, like, what exactly prompted him to put a complete leg in there when we don't have anything, the only known Carnotaurus specimen, below the top of the tibia and the fibula. And why did he leave the tail incomplete? We're missing that in holotype. So that's an honest element of reconstruction there. But then why include the feet? I don't know, and it wasn't written down, so there's nothing I can do to scrutinize it. I can't buy it.
Yeah, it's basically, I think we have brought it up in our private conversations quite a lot, that in fact, that the Carnotaurus specimen itself, the holotype, it does not actually preserve feet. I think this was pretty much reconstructed and added to the skeleton later, and I'm actually struggling to remember, in fact, how did they conclude that it had those particular type of legs in general, because I noticed that some of the Velociraptorids, there is a proposition to split them into Carnotaurinae and or Carnotaurinae. I can't remember for sure. I think it was Carnotaurinae, and to Majungasaurinae. And some of the differences between them is the proportions of their hind limbs to the rest of the body, with Carnotaurinae presumably having them longer and Majungasaurinae having them shorter. But that's what I've noticed. I don't know if that's actually a true distinguishing trait. But yeah, what is it based on?
Test it against Carnotaurus anyway, because those bits are missing. And it'd be one thing if he just took the feet off of another Abelisaur. But if that was the case, why not bring the tail across? So since I cannot see the rationale behind the skeletal, and by the way, the book is full of stuff like that. It just never explained. So, ever since he wrote Predatory Dinosaurs of the World, you got to give him credit. In terms of rhetoric, he came across as authoritative because he was able to put, or at least confidently put, some measurements to some of these taxa. He said, all sorts of things with an air of authority. Once you start getting into the fact checking and so on, you end up with too many questions. Really trust some of those ideas. It all comes down, and you say it again. It all comes down to, how do you know it? If you can't say how, and you can't really comment on whether that conclusion valid or not.
There's another interesting thing. This is actually a good point. I think we have to establish that when we address, especially for people who are watching and listening, or gonna be watching the video from the beginning once I upload it, we do not criticize the people or the authors or those who say opinions. We criticize the arguments themselves. Because, as it was correctly pointed out by Jeffrey right now, and I'm addressing the audience right now here, that we want to be able to test the conclusion and understand how it was achieved. And if we see that we cannot, achieve that in a satisfactory manner, well, we're gonna naturally have questions. And if we cannot get these questions answered, we simply reject the argument. No reason to get offended over it, by the way. Sorry, Jeffrey. Carry on.
It's nothing personal. Science is meant to be objective, so accept ideas or not, and there's your rationale. Oh, paleontologists are still humans, so we kind of get emotionally wrapped up in certain ideas, and that's why you have people yelling at each other with red faces and shrieking voices about whether Nanotyrannus is valid or not. That's just kind of snowballed into its own beast for reasons that have nothing to do with the science at all. But as far as like when we're having conversations, I appreciate you pointing that out, Arson. We are looking at the ideas, and it's nothing personal. This is just how science works, and reasonable people are going to disagree. That's kind of what I'm driving at with the answer to the question, Boomer's question here. Are going to be different taxonomic opinions. You're going to have some people kind of lump things together, and others who will split them apart. And if you want to know which argument has their backing, look into the how, and sometimes you got to just really grit your teeth and go through some really dry material. But whoever's showing you how and supporting that, that's the argument that you go with. Whichever argument supports or explains the most facts, whichever argument is accurately predicting new discoveries. Anything further to say about that particular?
I got one more thing to add about specific point that Z Boomer brought up above, and that's basically. Sorry, I'm just reading the comment. For fuck's sake! Sorry, I just like.
I'm really trying to get my goat here, and you have no idea how much we're trying to get my goat right now. I know Tyrannus. What about Raptor Rex?
Okay, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Just a second. I just want to address the Carcharodontosaurus point as well. That there is a very important point to make here. That Carcharodontosaurus, especially that time period in particular, when you talk about both South American and North African or just generally African taxa on them, they are extremely lacking in material. We are so lucky to actually have the only known specimen that is somewhat decently preserved of Giganotosaurus carolini, which is the holotype, and the only known specimen, aside from obviously the other specimen, which is a jaw fragment, and there's nothing you can really do with that one, because there's just no way you can reconstruct it, as you said earlier on, to fit to meet the necessary conditions to be able to actually call whatever that is a reconstruction. So the funny part is that unfortunately none of them, have that sort of material. Even Carcharodontosaurus, lucky enough, we have some skull material, which is fairly decent. Or shall we just say had skull material, because I believe some of it was destroyed during the bombing. And that is the bombing, not bombing, in case somebody decides to take that comment out of context. And but yeah, we kind of were in a bit of a dead end there. And Tyrannotitan, really poorly known taxon, Mapiosaurus, though, on the other hand, has some nice fragments from a variety of specimens. I believe there was a whole... Philip Curie, when we interviewed him with Josh, he described that there was a whole bunch of them there, and there were some good skulls in there as well. So, Mapiosaurus and Giganotosaurus generally give us a decent idea of what they looked like from that time period. But they're both from the same continent, and they're direct, consequential, lineage of each other, in the sense that when you have the record of Giganotosaurus in a certain time period, which I think, if I'm correct, it was 97 to 95 million years ago, from Candelara's formation, then we have a Huinzul formation of Mapiosaurus, which is dated, I think, 95 to 93 million years ago. So they are in direct order, which suggested me to obviously bring up the question of anagenesis, but again, due to lack of material sample, we probably won't be able to really objectively test this theory for a while. But yeah, it's worth to note, guys, it's extremely fragmented, and it's very hard to prove or support the, should I say, relationship of these taxa to the same degree. So at the moment, I think all South American Carcharodontosaurids are, lumped into Giganotosaurini, and all of the African ones are just Carcharodontosaurinae, or just Carcharodontosaurids, something like that. So it's a bit of a complication there as well, because there are obviously a variety of different pieces of work that propose different things. So there is that. Anything to add to this, Jeffrey?
Just to say that, yeah, it's going to be kind of vague for a while, and you'll get opinions going back and forth, not always well-supported, because a lot of this is coming out of the Chem formation of Morocco, and because of the geology of the area, you end up with a lot of theropods for some reason, a lot of really fragmentary bits and pieces. So trying to make sense of it is difficult enough. Then you've got the whole fossil piracy involved. You've got the political situation over there at this time. So it's just a difficult situation, and I wish that we could do something to give you some clarity on this taxonomy, but it's kind of hopeless for the time being.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty rough out there, unfortunately, and it's one of the most interesting areas to study, and it's one of the most, it's interesting how well known it is, and popular it is, and yet it's just really not that much known when you start digging through it. It's just really not a lot. So
that's the funny thing. There are so many popular dinosaurs that we know about. Brachiosaurus. We don't know a lot about that taxon. We know a lot more about Giraffatitan than we know about Brachiosaurus. Brachiosaurus is the famous one because it was first, and it was full-sized better. Lots and lots of popular dinosaurs that we don't know nearly as much as we think.
And because Brachiosaurus was in Jurassic Park, so there's that as well. I can almost predict that if Jurassic Park was never made, not that many people would probably know about Brachiosaurus. Maybe more people would know about Giraffatitan instead, by the way.
Well, the big thing with Brachiosaurus and why it kind of had a leg up on the whole situation, because when Elmer Riggs first discovered it, he publicized it in Scientific American, if I remember correctly, as largest dinosaur yet found. And it was that way for many years. So in popular culture, from first half of the 20th century, maybe first 2/3 of the 20th century, that was the biggest dinosaur known. And then the 80s, you started cutting away into that, like with Ultrasauros, which turned out to be Brachiosaurus. Then you got Sauroposeidon. Argentinosaurus came up in 90s, if I remember correctly, and its reputation has kind of been whittled away like that. But Brachiosaurus name echoes in a lot of us older folks' minds.
There's another thing to note, though. Argentinosaurus is actually not that well known either. Like, there's not a whole lot of material on it, although it's been made famous at, quite a bit. And as it later turns out, it's actually not that much material. And yeah, there was a popularized image of Giganotosaurus hunting Argentinosaurus, but it was probably mistaken with Mapiosaurus, because Argentinosaurus actually, on a record, at least based on fossil record, it shows up after Giganotosaurus presumably disappears, and instead Mapiosaurus shows up. So, in case somebody didn't know that, Giganotosaurus and Argentinosaurus are from different time periods. Although very close to each other, but still different time periods.
All right. So, just to let you know, I've probably got about 10 minutes before the lizards are going to, like, scream at me.
Okay, let's quickly address a few things then. Is there anything that we can do today, and then we can always carry on next time, because I believe we might still be able to do something else. In any case, guys, do you want to quickly type something, questions, last minute questions that we can quickly jump at? And
you can see on the screen they're madly typing.
Yeah, there's stuff going on. Yeah, there's like the internal affairs. Brachiosaurus in every single museum has a Giraffatitan skull replica, doesn't it? I mean, the original paper that describes some fragments of Brachiosaurus skull, which was described as some kind of mix of Camarasaurus skull and Diplodocus skull. However, it was in a time, which I guessed it didn't have too much information about every dinosaur. The Camarasaurus. Okay, so it's basically the quote claims. So the quote, wherever it was, the description was describing it as a hybrid between Camarasaurus and Diplodocus, presumably. Interesting.
Yeah, I actually did a write-up on this for the museum blog. So if you go to dinosaurpark.org, I did this in April. I can't remember the exact date, but I did a write-up on Brachiosaurus, and so I have some sources that I linked to there, and that'll give you the full story. But to give you just kind of a short answer to that question, we do have good skull material for Giraffatitan, and that's what look of Brachiosaurus has been based on. There is a mystery skull that came out of the same story as Brontosaurus and Brachiosaurus, that was recovered by the Yale Peabody Museum. So this is back during Marsh's time. And it was a pretty good skull, just wasn't attached to anything. We don't know what it goes to. Brachiosaurus is the most likely probability for what had that skull. It's a fairly complete skull, and the paper that was examining it and attributing it to Brachiosaurus tentatively includes some photographs of the restoration and some details on the restoration process. And it does look like a cross between a Giraffatitan skull and a Camarasaurus skull. Not so much Diplodocus, but that was the skull that they almost put on Brontosaurus, and it might have been the reason why they eventually put a Camarasaurus skull on there, because somebody felt that Brontosaurus had to have been related to Camarasaurus. There were Camarasaur bones mixed in with the skeleton that was on display, and that kind of threw things off as well. So, might have a Brachiosaurus skull that is legit, and yeah, that's kind of the story, a short version.
And I think it perfectly well illustrates the problem when we find animals, or we have taxa which never came with a skull, such as a variety of theropods in particular too, because there's been quite a few of them, both from Asia and from Africa, I believe, that we just even from Europe, the very well-known Metriacanthosaurus, actually, Parkeri, from I think it was from Oxford Clay Formation in England, and it's been popularized by Jurassic Park franchise because it was featured somehow in the books, and I think there was also a label that people pointed out, etc. In the movies as well, when Dennis Nedry was taking the vials and trying to take them out of the island. But we never have the skull, and yet we have a whole, family within the Allosauridia categorized as Metriacanthosauridae, but this is the type taxon is missing the skull, so it's frequently usually been depicted as a hybrid of a variety of different. Basically, there's the whole fantasy land related to that is depicted as a hybrid of Yanquanosaurus skull from China, and also related taxon also from China. Sinraptor as well. You would know both of them, I'm sure. And yeah, they just like throw these together somehow and just come up with some weird ideas and just say, yeah, that's probably what it looks like. And yeah, looks interesting, but we do not know. We don't have the skull material.
Which kind of goes back to the whole issue of reconstruction, because This is why we need to keep reconstructions as scientifically rigorous as possible. If you're tracing the look of these animals over time with reconstructions, the more they're based in the science, the easier it is to see where the mistakes were and where the unknowns were. I don't have the ability to take pictures of it right now, but I have a 3D print of the most recent reconstruction of Utahraptor skull here on my desk, because Utahraptor is the other sculpture we're going to be putting in the park at some point, hopefully this year. Whole COVID-19 thing has kind of delayed that, but in any case, I've also got a Velociraptor skull, which, oddly enough, is the same size, because that's how the Tyrannosaurus skull printed out. And you look at the two of them together, and the Utahraptor skull looks almost like it ought to belong on something like Albertosaurus. It's very Tyrannosaur looking. But when you look at the nitty-gritty, yes, it's a raptor skull. And a lot of early reconstructions of Utahraptor were using stuff that was maybe a little more along the lines of Velociraptor. So, as we go along, we learn a lot of things, and it's really important not to take them for granted.
Yep, it's always very interesting that sometimes it's just another point to demonstrate that just similarity in looks do not always indicate direct relationship. There are many things that might look very much like each other, but they might be, let's say, further related from each other than the taxon next to it, which might look almost nothing like the other one. Does that make sense? Like, there's been quite a number of things we have brought up at that point in the past when I mentioned about how body plan of, basically Tyrannosaurids is somewhat following in a similar manner of the later time period of Carcharodontosaurus because of the bigger head, overall tendency to smaller forelimbs, because in fact the Carcharodontosaurid forelimbs seem to be very much similar in size to Tyrannosaurids, just a slightly bigger overall, but not too much. And it's very interesting to know that obviously when you start looking into the details, it's obvious that they're not actually as closely related as some other free roaming taxa, at least as they're placed in the family, because it's a long story, for that, because we don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, to unpack it. We can unpack it later in terms of the Tyrannosauroidea family and what makes it so crazy, but we can leave that topic on its own, to address it. But I think we have discussed that point as well about the similarity in general body plan, how they can be frequently confusing and make a mistake to think that they are closely related, but they might actually just be completely different things instead.
Yeah.
And shall we answer some questions quickly before we have to part? Because you said, that...
Yeah. Yeah, it's getting about time.
Yep.
To answer Scorpy's question, is it likely that Malpusaurus was a direct descendant of Giganotosaurus? Unfortunately, I haven't looked enough into Malpusaurus to really be able to answer that question with the reliability. Giganotosaurus is one of the taxa at the park. I haven't heard anybody really forward that idea. We just mentioned that chronologically, sure, that could work. Without looking at the bones and looking into the details of what that case could be and how we could tell, just going off of the chronology, I'd say, yeah, that's probably worth looking into. But give kind of a counter hypothesis. To have Mapusaurus come in a little bit later would indicate that you've got something coming in from outside of the area that Giganotosaurus used to inhabit, and then ends up looking kind of the same or getting some of the same sorts of gigantism as it replaces Giganotosaurus in ecology because of some extinction event.
Yeah, there's many ways to look at it. So, and I think one of the main problems it's I don't even know if it's possible to answer. Like, is it likely? It's a bit of a very umbrella question. Like, is it likely? I don't think I can quantify it to actually to give you a very good answer. You know, if somebody might just say, yeah, it's very likely because they will just tick the box and say yes. I want to be honest about it, as honest as I can, and I'll just say I don't think it's a good way. There's a reliable way to answer this question correctly at the moment, because of the lack of material, and the sample of material specimens itself is just so small. It's just like possibilities are literally so wide, and we cannot narrow it down enough, in my opinion, to answer that question properly. It's possible. I can say it's possible, but I don't know how likely that possibility is.
Well, I'd be happy to look into that. I think that's an interesting question.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
But you know, I'm going to hesitate to say anything about that, as there are a lot of hypotheses that would be difficult to deduce which one would be the strongest based on. Sorry, I know that's vague. That's
just all we have, unfortunately. Yeah, that's there's not much more to say about that. I'm afraid. I mean, I've always suggested the idea, but yeah, I see Three-Horn Face came in, and yeah, you're almost at the end, mate. We're just about to wrap up the session. So, but if Jeffrey, by the way, can we quickly ask you, are you still gonna be possible to do tomorrow during the day, or is that gonna be cancelled because of tonight, or are we still gonna be able to do it?
I'm good for tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, so we are gonna be recording another one tomorrow, so it will be 4 p.m. UK time, guys. Okay, so tomorrow 4 p.m. UK time. Just gonna write this down so people remember. And the other thing I wanted to quickly say, just to both of us. I mean, of course, Z-Boomer asks you, Jeffrey. So do you want to address this question first, and then if I'm able to, I'll quickly chime in as well. It's the one above about the Tarbosaurus quote unquote pouch.
I think you've got as much information as I do on this. A lot of what I know about it is coming from what Phil Currie said. Video interview with him. I've looked outside of that interview to look at the specimens. That was part of putting together the Tyrannosaur chart and everything like that. But, in terms of pouch, like if you're thinking something like a pelican pouch, that wouldn't be that specialized. We're talking more like the pouch, if you can call it a pouch, you would see on something like alligator. Yep. Really more just indication of looser skin where some of the larger muscles, the jaw would go.
Yeah, there are like the jaw muscle attachments in that area, and also I think it's a flexible sort of muscle that allows them to swallow, probably, their food, because they don't chew their food, they're just like, they rip it apart and then they just have to push it down until it gets to their stomach.
Right. And so, like, the fact that you're putting pouch in quotation marks here is very, very prudent of you. You could call it a pouch, but definitely not talking like, say, a kangaroo pouch or a pelican pouch, or it just would have had kind of a bit tighter, looser looking sort of jowls underneath the throat there. I've seen some paleo artists run with it and say, "Oh wow, it must have been like a frigate bird," and they put these gigantic red throat balloons on the thing.
Cough. Louis Ray probably was guilty of that crime.
Yeah, there's no reason to jump to that conclusion.
No, not at all. I mean, with all due respect, I love Ray's old work, but sometimes he just, like, he makes me want to climb the walls from time to time. Sorry, Louis. just what it is. There's just some type of art that just makes me go absolutely mad.
Like, it's that Paleoart thing of, like, when in doubt, speculate wildly, and that's an artistic movement that has nothing to do with the science. So stop trying to say that you're doing something scientifically credible there. Testing that. I mean, I'd love to hear how someone would propose testing whether that animal could have done something like that. That's the scientific mindset.
Yeah.
Is it possible? But how can we possibly test whether the living animal had that or not? Otherwise,
Jeffrey, you know what's interesting? I love how you are now warming up for a proper rant, but you still have to go. So you will have to definitely, like, bring up that spark again tomorrow when we hit the next session, because we're gonna be talking about Tyrannosauroidia. I know the heated subject, so we can get you to start ranting properly. Because all of this, however long we've been recording, guys, that's just like warming up. Okay, just so you know, that was a warm up.
It's not hard to get me to rant, and I'm very verbose. I love to use Calvin and Hobbes kinds of words. So,
Oh, by the way, since I'm not monetized and because this content is not for little children, so feel free to use whatever you feel like. It's up to yourself, your discretion. So, but can we just quickly see if we can address the last one? And guys, we have to go after that because Jeffrey, unlike some people here, myself included, we have to be at work and go to work. I work from home, but he has to be at work, okay? So, how strong the opening jaw muscles of theropods dinosaurs? So basically what we're talking about is not when they close their mouth, but when they actually try to open it. Because, as he correctly pointed out, you can tie the crocodilian mouth with the duct tape and they will not be able to open it or snap it, but if they close it, they can literally just snap, some of the toughest of things out there, and with almost zero impact on themselves. So, do you have anything to say about that?
Again, really interesting question, and I think kind of the relevant study to answering that would be, can't think of the reference right now, but there was a study done compared Tyrannosaurus, Allosaurus, and Coelophysis in terms of their jaw musculature. And they were looking at how powerful the bite would be at different gaps. Most powerful bite wouldn't have had much of a gape width. So that's with closing, right? Here's the funny thing. I'm sure you've heard that Allosaurus had an incredibly wide sort of a gape. I can't remember the number of degrees, but it's ridiculously large. It's rivaling something like a Smilodon.
Something like that, yeah. I've heard that it's presumed. Well, I mean, I've seen the paper, but I can't remember what it was either. But I've read it a long time ago, and it was something along those lines that it was, even for a theropod, it was quite crazy.
Yeah. The surprising thing to come out of that study, at least for me, is that Tyrannosaurus rex was rivaling Allosaurus in terms of its maximum gait. Now, it wasn't rivaling among that three group. It couldn't do that as much as Allosaurus could, but it was an impressive gait. And so I would imagine that the jaw muscles in a Tyrannosaurus rex, in order to reach a gape like that, could have been stronger than you might see in a crocodilian, like alligator. But that mean that snap, say, like duct tape? That's getting into specifics that I don't think I could quite calculate for you.
Yeah, I don't think we can right now. Do you know what would be really great? If Jason was here as well, because Jason has, like, he spends a lot of, I think he's done a lot of studies because of his biology background as well, and he's just generally very, like, notice how whenever it comes to understanding, like, the animals, he's incredibly good at doing. Oh, there we go. We got a screenshot posted. Not nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So he's just really, like, good at understanding, how they work. Like, you can ask him something and he'll just, like, produce information, like, out of thin air in a click finger, And that would be quite helpful if he was here as well,
You can fact check them, and it's like, whoa, yeah, here are the papers and everything like that. It's also a lot better at the math than I am. I've got the English major syndrome of, like, I'm decent at math, but I
Math has been my, like, absolute nightmare, to be honest. Like, back at school and everything, just math was never my thing, basically. I'm not a good mathematician.
But I mean, you can see there that that's quite a wide ape, and so I'd say pound for pound, Tyrannosaurus probably had a stronger forces for being able to open the jaws, but they're not going to be nearly as strong as anything for closing. It didn't have to have a lot of power opening its mouth, and so I don't know if you could do it with just duct tape, but you could certainly, maybe some, like, scaling wire would work just fine.
Yeah, I was gonna say something like a strong but flexible wire of some sort. That's just in case, maybe do like a triple wrap. In case one snaps, there's always gonna be the other two that might still hold it for a long time.
And make sure that it's barbed wire, because
so it discourages it from, because their faces, remember, they are quite sturdy and they could take a lot of punishment, so
big animals, so take chances, use the barbed wire to seal your Tyrannosaurus mouth shut. And on that note, I'm afraid I am going to have to go and feed some reptiles. Appropriate spot to end things.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for coming. And guys, tomorrow 4 p.m. UK time. So for those who are in Europe and maybe around the Netherlands area, some of you are, it will be 1 hour plus, so it will be 5 p.m. And those of you from any other places, I'm afraid you'll have to do the math here, because I just cannot do it from the head right now. But Jeff, thank you for coming, and I'll see you tomorrow, and we'll continue with some crazy stuff, and we're gonna do some rants and reward the audience with what they've been waiting for.
Yeah. Catch you later, and maybe we'll have to bring up Raptor Rex tomorrow if you're looking for epic rants, because dang.
Yeah, we'll do it. The Emperor.
That rant. The epicness of that rant.
Yes, I've already experienced it, so it's just gonna be like me, almost like rewatching a favorite movie that I haven't watched for a long time. So, Okay, let's just say goodbye to the audience. Guys, thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, share, and let's boost this whole thing up to 1000 so that I can do live streams from my mobile phone where I have a better camera. Make sure you eat a lot, good food, drink a lot of water, stay safe, and refrain from touching people at the moment. Okay, so in the meantime, I've been AKRex, and yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, like Scorpy says, wash your hands, and if you're referring to me, like this is allergies. Just didn't mute it quickly enough.
That's true. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you're here tomorrow, and let's do this properly. I'll probably post a reminder now that we are already set with the time and everything. So make sure that I will make sure that everybody knows it, and we'll use the same thread here to continue with the next session. And Jeffrey, get back to work. Get back to work, and I'll see you later. Okay, he left. Right, guys, thanks very much, and I'll see you later, and you take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Alright, see you, mate. Thanks for coming.